I'm not really the person who should be giving this. It should be a colleague from the De Vere Society called Naomi Magri, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. Many of the articles that she had written, which are in Great Oxford, I've got copies of that. They're actually online, so you don't have to accept the Oxfordian premise to go and look at her wonderful research that she did. She's based in Mantua, and she invited me over, and we had a really good look around. I'd also like to thank the Shakespeare Authorship Trust. Let's see, does this work? Does that work? That one. Yes. I've been coming on to these lectures now for a good 10 years or more, and over the years I've been very lucky to hear some wonderful people speak. So I heard Roz speak, so that was very good. Charles Beauclerk, so that was excellent, and Bill Rubinstein there, he was another very, very good speaker. In fact, from 2006, I've even got my notes. And there's a suave and sophisticated man who told us that we needed to brush against the grain with the question, and that William Leahy, Brunellian, and the following week was actually Richard Rowe. So there he was. That's actually speaking at the SAT a few years ago. So he's into his 80s then, and the outcome of it was this book. One of the things that Hank has mentioned is about the sycamore. Rennie Wise from UCL said, no, sycamore, Romeo was sick and more. And that's both in his biography and in his Arden edition of Romeo and Juliet, so it's just amazing that these things seem to get published. I don't mind people suggesting it as an opinion. Do I have a... Oh yes. One of the things that Richard talked about was Bergamo. So does anyone know the reference to Bergamo?
Sailmaker.
Sailmaker, yes. And it says, his father was a sailmaker in Bergamo. So half the standard comments about this are Bergamo is a long way inland. It's about 30 kilometres or miles or something from Milan. And sailmakers, this is stupid. So here's another piece of evidence to show that Shakespeare was really ignorant. The other half actually go and look up Bergamo and find that it was famous for making sails, because the flax or whatever goes into linen was locally available, and fairly damp climate, it meant that it didn't snap and that they could make great big long things. So Bergamo. My criticism, if it's like that, or my sort of different approach, is to say these social and topographical references are very good, but I'm actually more interested in the plays. And why was that reference to Bergamo and to the sailmaker in there? Well, what nobody mentions, except me, and you all know now, is that the slave, the servant in Italian comedy, comes from Bergamo. And in Taming the Shrew, Tranio there has changed places with his master, the young man, and he's going around saying, hey, look at me, I'm very rich, my dad is very... And then the master's father can come along and say, no, he's not, he's a slave, I've known him since he was 3 years old. His father's a sailmaker in Bergamo. And when they wore their costumes, they didn't just wear a mask or a harlequin outfit, but they had a special way of walking, and they had the accent. So it's a bit like saying, bloke go around and say, yeah, I be from, I'm really rich, my dad's very famous and he's dead rich, he gets me going. No, he's not, he's just a slave. His dad's a cider maker in Somerset. Laughter. and that's the point of it, is why it's there. There's another reference to Bergamo. Bergamasque, anyone know? Midsummer Night's Dream. Yeah, do you know who says it? Bottom. He says at the very end, when they can't wait to get rid of him, he says, I can sing a Bergamasque dance as well, yeah. And that's the last thing they want, because he's been so bad. So these are literary references, which I think are to me, are absolutely very important. So it's fantastic to go around Italy. I've been around Italy, I've driven around Sicily, and my wife has said, why are we going here? It's not something to do with Shakespeare, is it? Every time she gets me. So I went to Rufford Old Hall earlier this year, and she said, nice place. Why do you want to come here especially? Because that's where Shakespeare Shakespeare was meant to be. So anyway, he didn't go. So I want to talk about four literary things. So Roman comedy at the beginning, so sort of that goes into the commedia erudita, so Italian comedy, the novellas, and then finally the commedia dell'arte. Two people that we miss out. Who are the most famous Italian authors at the time? Petrarch and Dante. And they don't seem to get much of a mention. When Shakespeare mentions Petrarch, it's usually in things like As You Like It, when Orlando's making his silly poems and saying, oh no, this is terrible, it's even as bad as Petrarch, for goodness sake. And then, of course, we've got the sonnets, which are very similar. But some of the sonnets sort of seem to be within the tradition, but subverting it. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun, so that rather than they sort of have this idealised version of a female, so you can still be in love with her, even if she doesn't sort of reach this sort of idealised beauty. So the direct influence of Petrarch doesn't seem to be there, although we've got sonnet form. Direct influence of Dante hasn't been established, but I would suspect is there. Right, where does the title come from? Hamlet. We always go back to Hamlet. I got to watch my Q's and F here, so because we've got an expert, Eddie Jolly, who's going to tell me off for this. I think this is from Q2. There's a very slight difference of wording from F, and there's a similar reference in Q1. Anyway, there's David Tennant, for all who'd like to go and leer at him, and Mariah Gale, looking very beautiful as well. Patrick Stewart in the background on the dais with Penny Downey, and they've got the mousetrap going on. And he says, the story's excellent and writ in choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murderer gets the love of Gonzago's wife. Now this is Shakespeare telling us it's writ in Italian. This is not us inventing it. This is what Shakespeare has said. So a lot of people have gone around looking for this. Was there a play about the murder of Gonzago? And they can't find one. But it's typical of all the Italian revenge tragedies that have been performed up and down the land, and Shakespeare just happens to be doing it in England just like everybody else. Don't really buy that one very much. The second thing that has been noticed is that there was a real murder, and it was pretty much exactly as the ghost describes. It was poison being poured into the ear. And if we look at this fellow, he's the Duke of Urbino. He's a fighter on behalf of Venice, also on behalf of the Papal States. This is his sort of badge of office. He's in his armour, he's a great fighter, and he's got his beaver up so you can see his face. This is almost a description of the ghost in Hamlet, and it is identical to the story that Hamlet gets presented before the king. So it's amazing. Bloke's name isn't, he's not a Gonzaga, but his wife is, so there's a link there. And this has been recognised by Geoffrey Bullough, who did the narrative and dramatic sources of William Shakespeare. How you find out is difficult, because it's written up in Italian. There are descriptions, it went to court, there are various cases, but this is not something that gets talked about in the Mermaid Tavern. I mean, I've lived in ports almost all my life. I come from Bristol. I went to the university in Southampton. I lived in Vancouver. I lived in Lima. I lived in London. I live near Portsmouth now. And I'm always on a Friday night dressed up, meeting all these sailors who come ashore. All these Russian freighters. They're not one of them wants to talk about Dostoevsky. I mean, apparently this is what Shakespeare did. Was he hung around? He dressed up and he met all these Italian people who told him, "Oh yeah, I had a great story about this Gonzaga who got murdered with poison poured in his ear." Oh, I think I'll go and write that one into my next play about a stupid thing. Right, let's start with Roman comedy. And this is a contemporary reference, so 1594, so Innocents' Day. It's from an account of what happened at Gray's Inn, so it's known as the Gesta Graeorum. And can we just turn the lights down slightly so we can read it? Anyone able to? Right, dancing, revelling with gentlemen, with gentlewomen, and after such sports, not too far. I can take off some clothes now. Dancing, revelling with gentlewomen, and after such sports, a comedy of errors, like to Plautus his Menipmus was played by the players. So you can see all these ladies, these gentlewomen there, about to be danced and revelled. I'm not sure what kind of euphemism that revelling really is. Anyway, you can see the tradition carries on. So this is Gray's Inn up in London, just the other side, sort of towards King's Cross. And so this is a contemporary reference to a play of Shakespeare, Comedy of Errors, which is very, very like a Roman comedy written by Plautus Menipmus. And that's about kings. So this is a medieval manuscript, and it's actually from Terence, but not from Plautus. And it's got a number of figures there, and they're dressed up with their masks, and they've got their names written above them. Roman comedy was put onto a stage which had these little alcoves so that people could hide, and then there's a sort of higher level that people could open a window. The only time I've ever really seen this was at the Globe with Merry Wives of Windsor, where they seem to have used this sort of kind of backstage. Off to the left is usually the town, I think, and to the other side is the port, and then it's a fixed static setting, and the plot is continuous and time is continuous, and unities are followed. And so the Comedy of Errors is the only play of Shakespeare that follows the unities, or is it? Another one does. Tempest. And you think, oh, that's amazing. No. So the Comedy of Errors is an early play of Shakespeare because he's obviously following this, and then it goes into more dynamic staging where people walk on and they start saying, oh, here we are, or, you know, what place is this, friend, that sort of thing. But I don't really think The Tempest is a late play. I don't like it very much, but I hate it. But I think it follows the unities anyway. So this is a sort of fixed backdrop there that you get in a Roman play, and nothing much sort of changes. And the Comedy of Errors, to a large extent, follows this. So it's a Roman play. Right. Novellas. So this is the prose one. So Boccaccio, the Decameron. So he wrote 100 stories there. Bandello started off in Italy, and he moved over to France. And his stories, I think Hank was referring to them, were written up by Belforest, Histoire Tragique, in some of the earlier volumes, and then a couple of others, including Cinzio. The stories of Boccaccio are translated in Painter's Palace of Pleasure, and the story in All's Well of Beltramo and Giulietta become Bertram and Helen, so we've got that kind of story in there. The posthumous wagering on Imogen, or Imogen's fidelity, so that's in Cymbeline. That comes from another story in Boccaccio. I asked a student last year, I think it was, we were up in Stratford, and she was Italian, and she'd done a lot on this, on the Italian background. I wish I could have got hold of what she'd said. And she was reasonably convinced that Shakespeare had read this in the original Italian, so he hadn't read it through any kind of intermediary. Bandello, we've got the story of Tembreo, Fenicia, who become Benedict and Beatrice in Much Ado, which is on in the Old Vic now, so I recommend that you go there. Fiorentino's collection of short stories includes Il Pecorone, which provides details for the Merchant of Venice, and then Cinzio, 100 Tales, so we've got the story of Othello from there. So Shakespeare is reading some high-class Italian novels, and how you read 100 stories and then say, ooh, I like number 38, I think I'll write a play about that one. You know, what about the first 37? Why don't you write a play about any of those? Well, for whatever reason, he's chosen one. Either that, or he's just flipped it open on a page, or maybe that was a few pages from the book that the Italian merchant down at Mermaid just happened to give him, or he stole or something like that. So these are novellas. I'm more interested in the plays. So here we have, did anyone go to this a few years ago? Anyone actually go and see it in the Middle Temple? Fantastic. I missed this, but I went the following year to see Richard II there, and it was just wonderful. So this is the Globe production, which was on at the Globe here 10, 11 years ago, and it was on last year. It's currently shown in New York, and you could reach out and touch them. And the cast was saying that they were so surprised because they read it, they talked about it, they read about it, and then when they put it on in front of the benches there from Middle Temple, they were all laughing in funny places. They didn't understand the illegal jokes that were there that had never really been explained. This is from John Manningham's diary, so 1602. At our feast we had a play called 12 Night, or What You Will, much like the Comedy of Errors, right, I've already got that one, or Menipmus and Plautus, but most like, and near to that Italian called Ingani. So there we go. There's a contemporary person saying that Shakespeare's play is based on an Italian prototype. And
who said that, Kevin?
Manningham, John Manningham. There is a doubt about Manningham's diary because it's discovered by John Payne Collier. People have looked at it and they said, well, they don't think that he's forged it. It's odd. There's no mention of Johnson in there, for instance. It is strange. Right, Commedia Erudita. This is the learned comedy. And here we have a beautiful Italian town at the top. And this is a publication of Ingannati. So this means the deceived, whereas Inganni means the tricks or the deceits. And it's a group of people called the Intronati, which is like the Thunderers, and they performed this in Siena. And they were like a private academy of people, aristocrats, who got together to study plays. They read the Plautus and Terence, and then they updated it and they put them into contemporary Italy. So this is what they did. This is the learned comedy. I don't know how widely it's performed, but it's certainly very important, and it obviously has made its way down to Middle Temple. So various writers associated with the Commedia Erudita are Machiavelli, would you believe, and Ariosto and Aretino. So let's go, where are we? Oh yeah, Machiavelli. Wrote one play, and it's called Mandragola, and it involves the administering of the mandrake drug so that adultery can triumph to the satisfaction of the parasite. So there's always a sidekick there who sort of tries to get something for nothing. The corrupt friar, the lover, the wife, the cuckolded husband. Now, which Italian play has got a Machiavellian character? Shakespeare. Which play of Shakespeare has Iago? Othello, right? Yeah, he's there. And what does Iago say? Nor poppy, nor mandragora, nor all the drowsy syrups of the world shall ever medicine thee to that sleep which thou owed yesterday before we went back to the pub with me. So this almost seems to be a reference. Mandragora, I've looked it up, doesn't seem to be mentioned in English anywhere apart from Shakespeare. So this is like a reference to a play by Machiavelli, by a character who's Machiavellian. Ariosto was said to have made the first attempt to modernise the plays of ancient Rome. He's got one called Gli Suppositi, so the Supposes, that was performed at Gray's Inn, and also was performed in Cambridge, and that was for the Duke of Ferrara's court, and that involves a student from Sicily who exchanges identity with his servant, so that's like Tranio in Taming of the Shrew, so as to become a student of love. Right, another influential writer was this one, Aretino, whose sonnets and plays won, in some cases lost in favour of popes and kings, and he's another influence, indirectly or directly, on Comedy of Errors, as suggested by various people, and on the portrayal of Sir Andrew Aguecheek in Twelfth Night. Another Commedia Erudita, another learned comedy that was published around about this time, was by Bartolomeo Rossi, 1584, and that involved a play which had a shipwreck and a magician on an island. Where have I heard that before? The big difference from Roman comedy is that the major relationship is father-daughter. So if you go back to the Comedy of Errors, it's father-son there, and you know the women, they're courtesans or he's married, but they're sort of not really very important. I don't think the courtesan in Comedy of Errors ever gets a name. But in the Commedia Erudita, in the Italian comedy, it's the father-daughter, and that's much more important. And obviously, I mean, can anyone not name 10 plays where there's a father who's going to do a Shylock to Jessica, or Portia's father sort of dictates from the grave, and so on. I'm sure that you can do that probably faster than I can. So the father-daughter relationship is absolutely essential. And that was in the Commedia Erudita. Now, the Commedia dell'arte was performed by players. They used the plots, the ideas from the Commedia Erudita. They simplified the plots into a series of moves, which come down to us as scenari, and then they would improvise their dialogue, a bit like me now. I've got a script here, not much like what I'm actually saying. And again, we're back to Hamlet. So, the best actors in the world, either for tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, and then we get this pastoral, tragical, comical, history. And at the very end, Polonius says, Seneca cannot be too heavy, nor Plautus too light. And we should remember that the comedians means actors. It doesn't necessarily mean funny ones. So that you've got serious ones, sometimes they call it commedia grave, but usually it's just commedia, and that means a play. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going to fall about laughing. And some things like Measure for Measure, I don't think I've heard a laugh in there anywhere. So comedies, because people don't really die at the end, but beyond that they're really quite serious things. So these are the travelling actors who come around, the troops, and they turn up. And they turn up in Elsinore, and Hamlet is very pleased, he's obviously met them before. We must be talking about a troupe of commedia dell'arte people. This is not commedia erudita, because that was just being performed by a few aristocrats at home with their mates. My own feeling is that the plays of Shakespeare are like the commedia erudita, that you've got these writers' circles and people, and they're writing for each other, and they're not initially intended to be performed, certainly not performed at the Globe. If they're going to be performed, it'll be before the Queen and court, and then afterwards, in my view, the players take them and they perform them in public, which is exactly what this lot are doing here. This is Mantled. Time for some water. 2 hours to go? Right, yeah, not bad. This is Mantua. And I went there on my birthday, which was a good day to go because Italy had just beaten somebody in a World Cup match, and so everybody was out in the streets, and my friend and colleague Naomi Magri marched us up and down this beautiful street, and there was a circular performance area, and she said, there you are, stay there. And what was happening? They were all wearing masks, and they were making jokes, and they were telling a story, and they had people in fits of laughter. I couldn't really follow it. I only get the gist of the story and what's going on. But it's these little side references. And apparently what the troops used to do, and they still do, is they come along and they say, what's going on around here then, Squire? And so they get a few little sort of details in. So my MP next to where I live put in this claim, bogus claim. And so the next thing is you say, well, you could always put in a claim for a new duck house, couldn't you? What a waste of money! Why is that? Because the ducks don't like it. And then you get, a series of jokes about that, and you'll be able to make fun through this comedy. And that's what Hamlet has done. He's been able to make a point through what the players are doing and to keep a little bit of a distance. So he's got this sort of satire. And it was the same with Spitting Image. Nobody really knew who was actually writing Spitting Image. And at the end, they'd have like about 100 different contributors. So you didn't know who was doing, all the really sort of savage bits about John Major or Neil Kinnock or whoever. One group of people were called the Gelosi, which is either the jealous or the zealous, so probably the zealous. And so this is a picture of them. This is in Rome. And the character in red there is Pantalone, so he's a Venetian, and he's very rich and pompous. And he's usually got another sidekick, another old man beside him, and he's got a daughter who he wants to sort of control and marry, and she's looking over her shoulder. She's got a few others in her sights. So you've got a number of stock situations, stock characters. The characters are instantly recognisable from the clothes that they're wearing, from the masks that they have, from having the different accents. So it's useful to say Venetian accent. I can't tell the difference between it, but I could tell someone with Birmingham accent or somebody with a Somerset accent or Newcastle or Irish. And if you have your different characters having these different accents, then they can be readily identified. So these are sort of main features of the Commedia dell'arte. I'm interested in, I never know whether it's scenari or scenari, I suppose, or scenari. Any Italians here? Anyone mind upsetting anyone by saying this badly? Oh, sorry. But originally it's called the Commedia all'improvvisato because it was improvised, and the dell'arte bit was only sort of from about 200 years a bit later on. So it was the improvisation that people would have. And if you've seen Two Gentlemen of Verona, where he comes out with a dog, and he's in tears because nobody wants to say goodbye to him. Look, this is my mother, and he takes off his shoe, and there's my mother, she's sad, and there's somebody else. But the dog, he just got the dog just looking around, just sort of quite happy there. And he could feel the river with his tears, I think. Now, that's obviously improvisable. You can just go and expand that or not. If people start booing or walking out, or buying apples or something, then you might just cut that down. And if it's going well, then you carry it on. So the improvised dialogue round a plot, and the plot is usually about 3 pages long. It's in 3 acts, and they've got about 20 moves or 20 actions that go on. So somebody's got a little bit they can do, and then somebody else comes along and it builds onto those. And the original plot seemed to be, from what we know, from Commedia Erudita and derived ultimately from Roman comedy. We've got these stock characters. So we've got 2 old men. So we've got Pantalone, a Venetian merchant. Anyone know the Ages of Man speech? Sixth age slips into the lean and slippered pantaloon. So Shakespeare knows this. And Baptista in Taming of the Shrew says, Baptista, he's another Pantaloon. Lucentio tells Bianca that he wishes to beguile the old Pantaloon. So not your father, or not the old man, but somebody who's a stock character from there. Another one is a Dottore Graziano. Well, that's a name that crops up in Shakespeare. Often from Padua. Ooh, there's a surprise. And the name crops up in Merchant of Venice and in Othello, and he's a secondary person. So he's a bit like the Duke in Two Gentlemen of Verona, or the Two Fathers. Yesterday in Merchadu, you've got Leonato and his brother Antonio. So you've got a secondary old man who's around there. You've got a second old man with a marriageable or non-wishing to marry daughter as well. Lots of other ones there that correspond to that. Oops, can I go back? Oh no, oh dear. Oh, phew. Oh, I missed something out. Lots of pairs of lovers in there. They didn't actually have masks, and they were sort of secondary to what's going on. So usually the main thing was the Pantalone and his servant and what he was doing, and the pairs of lovers trying to outwit him and outfox him and run off and that sort of thing. In Roman comedy, whereas the son who's very important, the son is actually wanting to marry the courtesan that the father is trying to keep as his bit on the side. So, different types of recreations on the same idea. Zani. The biggest parts were these servants, and they're called Zani, and we get the word zany from it. And so one of them is Arlecchino, so he's usually dressed in rags, not always in yellow and red, but he might be. And the name comes from Giovanni, so that's a Zani, and spoken in Bergamasco, the dialect of Bergamo, about 25 miles northeast of Milan, the easternmost city in the Venetian Empire. And many poor Bergamaschi, people from Bergamo, went to Venice looking for their, for work and to make their fortune. In the Commedia dell'arte, the Zani are allowed to address the audience directly, and the main role is to contribute to confusion. They're lowest in society. They're usually wanting food and sex, not necessarily in that order, but that's the main thing. And they have these little these little sort of comic things where they sort of like chase a fly and they pretend to eat it, and then they go, anyone want to buy a fly? No? Hungry? So that would be something that they could continue. So the Zani were there. Quite often they'd fall asleep and they'd have one leg sort of crossed, they'd be like this, and then they'd wake up at the wrong time. But they would often serve a letter and it would go to the wrong recipient. So these are things that Shakespeare's used, and they come much more to do with the slaves and the servants from the Commedia dell'arte than they do from the Commedia Erudita. Shakespeare's servants tend to be a bit more reliable, but not entirely. Two Gentlemen of Verona, they're not very good. Wow. Another one is the lady's usually got a sidekick. She's got a lady's maid that she can talk to fairly openly. So we've got Nerissa, we've got Juliet's nurse, we've got Lucetta in Two Gentlemen of Verona. We also have a Miles Gloriosus, that goes back to the Roman comedy, so there's a boastful soldier, and he comes down because he's Capitan. He's often Spanish, so we've got Don Armado in Love's Labour's Lost, we've got Paroles in All's Well That Ends Well, and Falstaff as well is really very much in that tradition. So, boastful soldier who's interested in food and trying to get away from any kind of responsibility. So these are stock characters that are used, and they're recognisable from their costumes. I'm most interested in these scenari, and this was published in 1611 by Scala in Italy, and he wrote about 100 of these up. And some people say, whoa, these are much too late for Shakespeare. 1611, he's finished by then. But these are not just ones that he's sat down and written in 1611. These are stories that have been going on for the last 40 years and that have been used by different people at different times. Some people have said that he's only getting this published because the tradition is dying out. There aren't so many troops going around performing these things, that they're going around for scripted comedy rather than for this unscripted one. I haven't seen this book. It's very, very well received. Richard Andrews, Professor of Italian at Leeds, and it's very expensive, so he's got a very detailed commentary. I've read other things that he's written though, and this is typical. People who are Italian experts go to Shakespeare for examples. They find it that Italian comedy and Italian literature permeates Shakespeare all the way through. When you go to biographers of Shakespeare, there's nothing to it. Exactly as Alexander was saying, there's an article by a chap called Earl Showerman who spoke last year, and that's on what Shakespearean scholars are saying about Italy. And I heard something on the radio this morning about an ancient philosopher who's saying you cannot talk about the ocean to a frog that lives in the well. And this seems to be what Shakespearean biographers are doing. You know, here's the well. We know that Shakespeare didn't go to Italy, therefore there can't be any influence. You know, but when you approach it from the outside, you either look at Italian comedy or you look at the plays just as plays and say, well, where does he get these things from? One thing that strikes me, I've not investigated this, is that at the time comedy was performed not so much in Italy as in Spain. There was a lot more Spanish comedy going on. It was really big, and nobody claims any Spanish comedy as a source of Shakespeare. Spanish pastoral, so the Diana, so a novella, but not as far as I know. So I'd be interested in going on to that one. Now, we've got that published by Scala, but this one is still in manuscript. And in Rome, there's a Palazzo Corsini. And in there's a 2-volume collection of manuscripts, and they are illustrated. And so a lot of people are going into these. I wish there would be a facsimile of it going on. And I was just reading about this recently. They are able to date some of the paper in there to about 1570. And they've got all sorts of different scenarios. Some of them coincide with Scala, some of them coincide with another manuscript in another museum in Rome. Let's see what we make of one of these scenarios. Right, personaggi. What's that? People, characters, thank you very much. Pantalone. Right, old man. Confiello servo. His servant. Graziano. Another old man, yeah. Bertolino. Don't know who he is. Right, figli. Daughter. Amarilli. Another female from there, a bit like Audrey. Fausto is usually the son of Pantalone. Selvaggio. Wild man, yeah. Maggio. Magician. Diavolo. Devils. Leone. Raw. Right, a little raw? Well, that's what the doctor said when I shaved my throat the other day. Atto primo. The Pantalone comes out, and this is what he does. Now, let's see if I can do it. I heard someone do this a few years ago. Bosun, here, master, watch here, good speak to the master, those 4 took yeah, oh, we run ourselves aground, hearty, my cheers, hearty, take the topsail, tend to the master's boat. I can't do it. Where's the master? Play the mail, I pray I keep below, where's the master? You not hear me, you mar our labour, keep to your cabins, you do assist the storm. So, Pantalone comes out, and he's got as much time as he needs to talk about the shipwreck, naufragio. And he talks about la perdita, the loss di Coviello, that's his most important person, his servant, Graziano, his mate, and Bertolini. And then fa leccio in quo. And that's a cue, right? In quote, at which Coviello, di dentro, from inside, comes out and he's looking for food. Recognise this? Tempest? Yeah. But Pantalone, so now I can never remember the names. Is that Antonio? Who's the King of Naples? Alonso. And then Fausto is his son who's lost, Ferdinand. And then he's got a servant here who's going to be Trinculo, I think. And so we get this. So, I don't know if any of you saw this, but this was most brilliant. This took my breath away when I saw this in 2005. And this actor came out and he just did the whole of the first scene, the opening scene of The Tempest, without any other actors. He just played all the parts there, and he's got this chess set, and he's waving it around, and he's moving it around. And I don't know, it was just fantastic. So it was just very much to my mind in the... Well, I thought... So this is Pantalone and Brigella. So this is the old man and his servant. And then we've got the lovers there. So that's Ferdinand and Miranda. And then we've got Arlecchino. So this is one of the slaves. So one of the servants, Trinculo, Stefano maybe. Selvaggio. Maggio. And Maggio's got a few spiriti. I don't think that's Ariel in the background. I think that's meant to be Miranda in the background, but he's usually got a few spirits as well. There's another one called La Nave, the ship. Almost identical, very similar story. And then there's another one, I Tre Satiri, the 3 wild men. And I've done that in English for you because I can't bother to do that again. And this is who was stealing his book and plotting against him, so he puts a spell on them and he makes them die. He makes them dance around. They say, oh, okay, stop us from dancing around, we'll give you back our book. And then the magician said, okay, I'll go and promise. And then the Zani, he has this thing, so he sort of like offers the book and then takes it away, I imagine. So you've got this going on. And then he makes this incantation, and what's he do? Strike his wand on the ground, they all stop dancing, and he goes back to civilization. So it seems to me that these stories are just the story, the plot of The Tempest, and I've written about this. It's on the website for the De Vere Society, where a lot of people said there's no source for The Tempest. No, absolutely not. He did not need a source. He did it all from his own head. His, what was it? Imagination. Oh yes. He just happens to imagine some things that are already written down elsewhere. So these are the sort of features that go on. The Tempest does have unities of time. Remember I said this at the beginning? I think The Tempest is an early play. And you've also got this very long bit of exposition, 500 lines, where we find out Miranda's background and who all these other people are as well. But that's not the action, that's not the plot of The Tempest. That's not in the plot, that's just background information. So, pretty much all there. You know. And then at the very end, the magician returns to civilization, usually Venice actually. Now, there are 2 major differences that Shakespeare has done with this. There are 3 major differences. First one, it's scripted. It's not improvised. Secondly, the Maggio becomes the protagonist. We're not talking about the Pantalone and the buffoons who have been shipwrecked. We are talking about this man who had previously been shipwrecked and who's on there. So he's now the focus of attention, and he's not the focus of attention in any of these scenarios. And thirdly, he gives him a very, very detailed history, explanation as to why he prized his library above his dukedom and how he got ushered out onto these bark and down the waters and probably down to Volcano, which is this sort of desolate island just off the north coast of Sicily. And that is exactly where Naples to Carthage, Tunis, that they're going on. So it seems to be inescapable that Shakespeare is using this as a model. What he's doing with it is your guess, but where he's got it from, where the origin is. And much as I admire all the great work that Richard Paul Rowe has done and other people have done on social and geographical background, I think, to me, this is more important. You know, I think they're both important. If you don't say that Shakespeare was in Italy and you say he's got all these mistakes around, then you can't demonstrate this. But if you can say he's in Italy, because look, he's got an inn here, he's got a square there, and a church somewhere else, which is exactly where they really are, then you can say, yes, he must have been in Italy, he must have witnessed these, he must have seen them, pretty much in the same way as I did in Mantua, when Naomi Magri said, go on, have a look at that. I don't necessarily understand what's going on, but I can then work it out. So, written in choice Italian. I think Shakespeare is absolutely there. Thank you very much.